What did it do? It was a nice run over here to Springdale Cemetery in Peoria, Illinois. I'm Jacob the Forester, and I'm out here wanting to identify some trees. I'm gonna show you guys some trees. There's some big old mature trees here at Springdale because of how historic and old this place is. In fact, in high school, my history teacher, Mrs. Olson, taught a Peoria history class. Yeah, Peoria history was a really interesting class. Actually, I got a little story before we start identifying trees. When we were driving in the bus up to the cemetery, we had just learned about all these terrible things that had happened, you know, when people were still around here. In fact, there's a lady that was murdered and a bunch of terrible things happened to her we don't have to get into. But anyway, we heard this like stories, and I was really into ghosts back then. There's some haunted stories of the cemetery and all these different things. And as we were pulling up in the bus, my whole class and I and Mrs. Olson, the bus driver pulls up and we see this terrible situation. There was a dog that was in this big old black Jeep with a big old steamroller pipe off the back. This little tiny dog jumped out this jacked up Jeep's window, and the owners ran over the dog with the back tire, and the dog was kind of dead on the side of the road. And so our whole class, after just hearing all these crazy stories, pulls up into the cemetery, and there's this lady like banging up against the side of our bus, crying and screaming. It was like, what's going on here? And that really scared the heck out of us. But you know what? I'm really glad that my teacher pulled over and the bus driver did, and they took care of those people and got them into a better situation. But you know, shout outs to that dog. The forest trees out here are pretty abundant. You know, you can tell in the forest stand areas that the trees are a lot smaller and thinner. Now maybe that's because it used to be grass and they let it go back to forest. But what happens in these forest conditions is these smaller trees pack up really tight together because many of them grow as small youngins, and then they compete. And as the trees compete, some of them succeed. That's why there's bigger ones out in the woods, and then the other ones stay in the lower areas. And since all the different trees have different qualities or abilities, the smaller ones that can withstand a lot of shade, like maples and eastern hawthorn beams and a bunch of cool trees, these ones are able to survive in the understory, while there are other trees like these big old oaks, especially these white oaks and whatnot, they like to shoot up into the sky and get some light as quick as possible because they can't really withstand the shade as well as those maples, eastern hawthorn beams can. So we're gonna go ahead and start identifying trees, and I'll show you some different aspects of them so you can check them out yourself if you live in the Midwest. This is actually a pretty cool thing. It talks about oak savannas here in Peoria. We're actually in prairie savanna ecosystem. So these grass ecosystems have sparse oaks, meaning the oaks are pretty far apart from one another. And you can see that this white oak over here is just standing out in the middle of this grass, and you know that's what a lot of our forests used to look like. All right, the first tree we're going to start out with is the eastern white pine. Eastern white pine used to be very abundant in the northeast United States, and it was used a lot to make ship masts for naval ships during colonization times. And England really wanted the trees, so they took a lot. Yeah, this tree grows pretty decent here in Peoria and Midwest, Central Illinois. And maybe you can see this in the video itself, but there are layers of branches. They kind of come out at different intervals on this tree, and they come out around the stem. So these trees, needles, have 5 needles per fascicle. Yeah, these needles on the eastern white pine drop all around the tree. This tree is a coniferous tree. It's a conifer, it's evergreen. So it keeps its needles on the whole tree all the time. And about every 3 years or so, the leaves will just drop off. What I mean by the 5 needles per fascicle is that there's a little thing on the bottom of the needles that connects to the branch that makes it so that these needles can all stick together. And if you take just one bit off the tree, there's 5 needles that are all put together. And so 5, you can think of the word white, W-H-I-T-E, having 5 letters. So the 5 letters of eastern white pine can help you remember that this tree has 5 needles. And another thing about them is the branches or the needles actually have kind of a blue hue to them. Now, I accidentally just pulled off one of the branches, but now you can see how blue the needles are. And hiding under the needles at the tips of the branches, you'll be able to find interesting little thing. Maybe you learned about this in science class, maybe you didn't. But yeah, it's a little tree bud. The bud is that primary growth. That's where the tree starts to grow outward and up. And so that's how trees get taller and wider. These little buds are where cell division occurs. So cell division makes cells stack on top of one another and then continue to grow. Or on pines, they're like branch buds, there's leaf buds, and then there's cone buds. So all these different types of buds can provide different means for the tree to be able to survive and reproduce. And I just pulled off a bunch of different leaves, and as you can see, they have these tiny little fascicles on them. And I just took them apart, and you'll be able to notice now that there's 5 needles per fascicle. Another cool thing about the eastern white pine is the pine cone is kind of banana shaped and long, and doesn't have armor on it. It's got some scales that you can see here, but there's no like pointy spikes on the pine cone. It's kind of soft and nice. Yeah, it actually smells pretty decent too. So another kind of interesting thing about pines in general, on the whole family, is that if you look on the underside of the scale, you might be able to see that there is 2 paler parts on the underside, and that's where the seeds on the pine cone first started to develop. And the lighter part is a scar from the seed, which starts down here and right near the center axis of the cone. And then the seed takes some of this material off of the cone with it, so it can catch wind and fly and then disperse and grow new trees. Another thing about trees is you want to be able to identify the bark. The pines, they have these interesting long plates, and they're kind of flaky. You can see the plates kind of like stack up on top of one another, because you can imagine the tree on the trunk grows outward like this. And so, you know, there's that whole thing where if I carve my name into this tree right here, in 20-30 years, is the carving going to be up here, or is it going to be the same? Well, it would actually be the same, because the tree grows outward from the center, and that's why the trees are so small, and then they get really big. So they kind of grow like this secondarily, as well as growing primarily up and out with their branches. So I've heard you can also put eastern white pine in tea, and I've chewed on it before. I've even I've even put some of the sap in my mouth, and believe me, it's totally gross. Like, don't do it, you might get sick. So I just tried it because we cut down a tree out in the woods, and it fell over, and there's this huge pocket of sap resin in it. It was just gooping out, and I was like, I wonder if this tastes all right. And so me and a friend just took our finger and put it on our tongue, and it stayed on my tongue for so long, I just spat for like 20-30 minutes. All right, let's move on to the next conifer tree. Okay, right here is a yew. These are yew trees or shrubs. It depends on the size of the plant, whether or not it's a tree or a shrub. So I'll just call this a multi-stemmed tree. These yew plants, they probably are pretty familiar to a lot of people. They use them as shrubs or bushes in yards really often, and I have one in my yard. And you can see, take off one of the leaves here, one of the needles. The needles are a little bit more flat. Then you might be able to see on the bottom there that there's two white lines that are parallel to one another that are on the bottom of the leaf. Yeah, those are called stomata. They're like bunches of tiny little dots that release water so the plant can respire and photosynthesize and do its whole plant thing. And there's a little point on the end of the leaf. As far as the bark goes, you can see it's kind of smoother, a little bit more flaky, and there's little branches coming out here, and all these like dots that are all around are actually from birds. There's these things called yellow-bellied sapsuckers, other types of birds. They drill little wells in the sides of the branches, and then those little wells, resin starts to come out, and then bugs start climbing up into them, and then the birds will eat the bugs that start to get attracted to the resin. So that's why a lot of trees look like they have these bands all around them. Happens on maples too. This bad boy, this big old lady, whatever you like to call it, is a white oak. It's a giant old white oak, and something cool you can notice from here is that there are still some leaves that are dead on the tree. A lot of trees in the white oak and beech family keep their leaves throughout the winter. It's a phenomenon called marcescence. Marcescence. Yeah, real interesting word. Sciencey. The potentials for marcescence and the reasons why it developed over time have been thought to protect the tree from deer browse or other types of animals browsing on its buds while they're developing before the spring. And other reasons that the trees might do that is because they're fire adapted species. So the oak ecosystems, the oaks in general, they have kind of thick bark, and they're able to withstand more frequent low burning fires. And sometimes the trees would, these trees are really good at developing new root systems or stronger root systems after they get injured. So the trees might even have these leaves kept on their branches so that they can catch fire and then die and then reproduce more in the future as a healthier tree. This is a pretty iconic oak leaf with the white oak. It's got round tips. Every oak in the white oak family or group, has the round tips, and every other in the red oak family has pointed tips. Here, as you can see on this is the white oak leaf, and this one behind it is a northern red oak. The white oak and the northern red oaks have the clear definitions of pointed and rounded. So, yep, the rounded is white oak and the pointed is red oaks or black oaks. Yo, I also wanted to point out that I'm being very respectful of the graves and not stepping on people's graves unless I need you to get through where I am. So yeah, I'm doing my best to pay my respects to all these people. Really key defining factor of oaks is that they have multiple buds, multiple buds on the ends of their branches. So if you come up to them and there's only one bud, you'll know that it's not an oak. All the oaks have multiple buds on the end. And these white oaks are kind of like reddish, and they're kind of star-shaped. If you look directly at them, as if you're looking at the tip of a pencil, right on. So the bark on the white oak is kind of platy when it gets really old like this. It grows these ridges, and they got ridge lines going down like this, and you can see the different layers, just kind of like on the eastern white pine. On younger trees, the bark is a lot more tight, and for example, this white oak right here it's starting to develop a thicker, platier bark, but we'll get up close and I'll show you the younger bark, even though it's a pretty dang old tree right here. So you can see the younger bark is starting to split and turn into these plates, and then right here it's really corky and started to make these ridges. So we got a tree right here. This tree is a tree of heaven. Yeah, the tree of heaven, and it's actually an invasive tree. We'll start out with the branches. The branches are pretty thick. You can see they're kind of stout, and they got leaf scars. They're pretty big, and the buds sit right above them. You can see it kind of makes like a U shape, and there's a bud which is called axillary bud on the side of the branch, and then on the tips of the branches they usually have the terminal buds, the ones at the right at the top. And if you break the branches on these tree of heaven, you'll notice that it smells. Some people say it smells like peanut butter. I think it smells like a pretty rancid peanut butter. It's not that great of a smell. And then the bark is really tight on the bigger trees, and they start to fissure or develop these valleys inside of the bark. It's kind of gray. It's a little more smooth, kind of like a young maple almost in types of and how the tree looks. Okay, cool. Well, that is enough trees for right now. I'm sure sometimes it's overwhelming for people to learn something so quick, especially when you can't touch it or sniff it or whatever, besides watching the video. But I really hope this helped and you enjoyed it a lot. That's what I do as a forester. That's my business's purpose, is to teach about silvics, about trees. So yeah, I'm out here in Springdale Cemetery. I had a really nice run over here. I am going to wander back home. I am going to enjoy the rest of my night and continue to grow as a human being. And always remember to keep learning, enjoy yourself, and take care of your mental health. Get outside, go do what you need to succeed and do the best that you possibly can in your life with what you're passionate about, what your dreams are all about. How well we do something, it really is influenced by our mental health. So taking care of yourself is very important, and being out in nature and just watching things move is really great for the brain. I mean, if you're just sitting inside watching a wall all the time or a screen, you know, that really affects how our health as humans is for the long term. So, you know, definitely get out and check out trees. You know, it's more beneficial than you think, and it very much so helps. Again, thank you. My name is Jacob the Forester. I am the owner of Silvix Forestry and Nursery, and I am really happy that you're watching this video. Thank you so much. Please leave a like, thumbs up, and subscribe if you enjoyed learning about trees here in Peoria and Midwest, Illinois. If you want to learn about anything more about these trees, I'm happy to talk to you about it. There's so much more to learn than just identifying them, and I am happy to do as much as I can to make these really entertaining. So I hope that you enjoyed. Just let me know in the comments. Peace.